every morning.
And so, if we can see our service as joy, then we'll never work a day in our life.
Just those little unseen acts of service, I think that's what pleases God the most, when no one else sees it but you and Him.
I will always think of thee.
Good morning, friends. Welcome to all of you who are here and all of you who are joining us from your homes or wherever you may be online. I think you all know us. I'm Nayaswami Jyotish, and this is Nayaswami Devi. And we live about half the time at Ananda Village in Northern California, and then we travel the rest of the time to the various worldwide centers of Ananda all over the world. I'll start with a reading from Whispers from Eternity. These are prayer demands. Master said that we should not pray like beggars, but we should pray knowing that we are God's children and demand what is rightly ours. So this is the demand: bless me that I perceive thee through the window of all activities. Bless me that I perceive thee through the windows of all joyous activities. Look upon me and cheer me always as I engage in my daily duties. Let my every action, whether waking, sleeping, or dreaming, be sprayed with the fountain of thy presence. There's something very interesting in here. The prayer is not, sometimes we think, oh, you've got to bless my actions, you've got to bless my attitudes and so on, and if you don't, I'm not worthy. Well, Master in here says, let my every action, whether waking, sleeping, or dreaming, be sprayed with the fountain of thy presence. So it's basically a prayer about turning our minds, our hearts toward God and drawing His grace, whether we're actively serving or sleeping or dreaming. If we keep the pole star, the needle of our consciousness pointed toward the pole star of God's light, then the grace will flow to us. So I want to expand a little on the story of Martha and Mary and set the stage a little. Now, Martha and Mary were disciples of and friends of Jesus. And they had a brother that you may have heard of. His name was Lazarus. And Jesus awakened him or had him rise from the dead. So, are we okay? Oh, we're okay. At any rate, the family, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, lived in a little village called Bethany. Maybe about the small village, maybe about the size of Ananda village, a couple hundred people, maybe a little more. And it was just a couple of miles from Jerusalem. So when Jesus was teaching in the area, he and the disciples would often stop by and spend time with Martha and Mary and Lazarus, or whatever little grouping there was. And so we can well imagine that Jesus and his disciples have arrived. They didn't have cell phones in those days, so he didn't call ahead and say, Martha and Mary were coming, should be there. GPS says about 11:18. Nothing like that. So whatever group there was, they just arrived. And they were probably hungry. They were young men. They'd been walking from wherever, and they arrived, and they were hungry and dusty. And so Martha and Mary naturally were now the hostesses, and they needed to prepare food and whatever else they needed for the comfort of their guests. So very natural kind of setting. We need to work with the images of friendship and something that's very natural, not Jesus way up there, far away, stern, on the cross, dying, and none of that. Just, they were very joyful, very happy group. And so Jesus was probably teaching in the area, doesn't say exactly the purpose, but they arrived and needed to be fed. So Martha was busy getting the food ready. And Mary probably should have been helping her, but she was sitting there just absorbing the presence of Jesus. And so Martha complained about that. And as we heard, Jesus rebuked her, not because of the fact that she was serving, but because of the fact that she was serving with the wrong attitude. And so the fact that she was not joyful in her service or forgetting herself in her service, that's what Jesus was rebuking. Martha, Martha, you're filled with care, you're filled with worries in your service, careful about many things, worried about many things. Just calm down, and just lose yourself in service. So Jesus was giving here instructions in the proper attitudes of service. Now, next week, there's another deeper level. Well, maybe I'll save that till the end. Next week, the service is going to be more on Mary's part in it. So, but I'll touch on that at the end, kind of as a prelude to whoever is speaking next week. So, coming back to the question about proper service. You know, Master said that our path was a combination of meditation and service. Meditation represented by Mary, service in this instance represented by Martha. Both of them are necessary. There's a talk that Master gave, and in his, booming enthusiasm, he said, "You will never get there if you do not serve." And so that's a very important part of our spiritual path. Most of us are unable to meditate all day long. Most of us don't have time, but we do have some means of also the ability to keep our minds on God. And whatever we do, if we think of that as a form of service to God, then it will become sanctified. So we might be at work. Maybe we work at Boeing or Microsoft or have some job that requires our concentration and is not necessarily what we would think of as a spiritually focused or supportive group around us. Nonetheless, if we do that in the proper way, if we do our work in the proper way, then we can feel that we're serving God, serving people. Hopefully whatever we're doing is of some benefit to the world. Therefore, the world is God. If we're benefiting the world, we're benefiting God. And so it's more the attitude that's important. Now, in a worldly sense, in an occupational sense, it's wonderful if you can do what you love. I think it was Confucius who said, if you love what you do, you don't have to work a day in your life, or you will never work a day in your life. And so, nice attitude. So, but not all of us in this kind of dualistic world are able to do what we love. But all of us can love what we do, because that attitude of bringing our consciousness into it, of cooking with love. Martha was cooking, probably. She should have been cooking with love, not thinking, why isn't Mary in here helping me? Chop, 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 chop. She should be in here, and I'm you know. So Jesus and his group didn't want to eat all that angry food. So naturally, Jesus was telling her to change her ways a little bit. So, but the attitude with which we do anything in the world can be sanctified. I remember a line from I was attracted early on, before I found autobiography of a yogi, I was trying to find alternate spiritual expressions. And so I read some American Indian or Native American mythology. And I remember one ceremony, I think it was a sun ceremony, where it started out and the line was, "The maiden entered walking in a sacred manner." Well, what does it mean to walk in a sacred manner? Do you kind of, no, walking in a sacred manner, working in a sacred manner, serving in a sacred manner is just serving with love, with joy, with any of the qualities of God. And if we bring those qualities of God into our service, then our service becomes sanctified. If we bring joy into the way we walk, we're walking in a sacred manner, because joy is sacred. All of these qualities of God that we can express at any time, in any way, are they sanctify whatever activity we're doing. But here we're talking more about the specifics of service and the right attitudes of service. One of the projects that we started, Devi and I started, about 5 or 6 years ago, was to write a book on Ananda Seva, or a service, Ananda service, because if Master said that meditation and service were the two legs of our path, then we have lots of teaching and courses on the meditation part, but we don't have much formal training on the service part. So we set out to write a book on that, and maybe some courses, but you know, man proposes and God disposes. And so in the meantime, life intervened, and we had a lot of other things, but we're hoping to get back to doing this perhaps when we go to India in the fall. But it's definitely the first project on our list for when we have the space to be able to do it. And I thought it might be interesting for you to hear a few of the chapters of that Ananda Seva book. So there are, at this point, you know, it's early on in the process, but there are about a dozen chapters. But these are the first 6 chapters. So first one, Seva is a means of dissolving the ego. The whole of the spiritual path is to dissolve the ego. The ego is the sense of separation from God. When we dissolve that separation, we remember who we are, and we're enlightened. So Seva is a means of helping us dissolve the ego. And then the second chapter is Seva is God serving God. That's after a beautiful little episode in Master's life. Toward the end of his life, he was taking on a lot of karma from his devotees. And so his knees were very painful. He said he could see astral entities shaped like corkscrews working on his knees. So you can imagine. But he was taking on karma. He could rise above it if he wanted. At any rate, some of the devotees a couple of the devotees, disciples were carrying him down some stairs. And he said, "Oh, thank you for your kind attentions." And they said, "Oh, no, no, Master, thank you for all you've given." And he just smiled sweetly and he said, "God serving God." That's his drama. And so the second chapter is to help us remember that it's always God serving God. Third chapter, attitudes and energy for service. So I have a little formula for success in service, but in anything. So willpower plus concentration plus intensity plus perseverance equals success. Willpower, concentration, intensity, and perseverance. That will bring success in anything. But in this case, since we're writing about service, those are the means by which we should serve. Service is a way of opening the heart. Especially, that was the problem with Martha. Her heart was thinking about herself and was closed down. So Jesus said, don't be like that. Just be loving in your service. So open your heart. So when we serve, it's a means of opening our heart and expanding our consciousness. Meditation is the foundation of service. In the Gita, paraphrasing in the second chapter, it says, established in yoga or established in the high state of union with God, then go forth and serve. So established in yoga, go forth and serve. So meditation, if we connect deeply, and then we can serve properly. And finally, this is just chapter 6, not finally in the book, but finally for what I'm saying this morning, that Ananda Seva is Babaji's way of helping redirect the consciousness of action, proper action in Dwapara Yuga. And so if we can get in tune with the proper way of serving, it will help create a model for proper action in this in this present yuga that we're just entering into it. So I'll just conclude with a paraphrase, Gandhi paraphrasing Rabindranath Tagore. And so this is Gandhi saying, I slept and dreamt that God was joy. I woke and saw that God was service. I woke again and saw that service was joy. And so if we can see our service as joy, then we'll never work a day in our life.
Thank you, Jyotish. That was very nice. I'll also share this morning, because we only come here once a year, or in this case once every 5 years, but we will correct that. So on May 19th, we will be celebrating the birthday of Swami Kriyananda, Ananda's founder and our lifelong teacher and divine friend. And he was asked over the years, what's Ananda's mission? And he gave different answers at different times, depending on, I think, what people needed to hear or who had asked the question. And one time he said, Ananda's mission is to have fun. And that was a nice answer, essentially to live with joy. Another time he said, Ananda's mission was to equalize the world on the spiritual plane. In other words, there's so much in this world, always, whatever age we live in, there's a pull of materialism. And the work of Master and our line of gurus is to counterbalance that. Not to counter it, that's different, but to counterbalance it so that we're putting out positive energy, spiritual energy. And you may think, well, how many devotees are there in the world compared to people that are just into self-service? And it's not the numbers, it's the intensity. Yogananda's guru, our Param Guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar said, the deeper the self-realization of a person, the more they are able to influence the world around them. And so it's not, you can have one soul of deep spiritual realization and thousands of people just milling around, but that one soul will have more impact on the world because of the level of his self-realization. So to equalize the world on the spiritual plane. And then on another occasion, Swamiji said, Ananda's mission, Ananda is like a great wave of joy that wants to give and give as long as people want to receive. And we have that quote up in our outreach office at Ananda Village. But this brings us to service, a wave of joy that wants to give and give as long as people are willing to receive. And now just to a note, a word of appreciation to all of you who are part of the Ananda Sangha here in Seattle. We have had a marvelous visit these last days, visiting Ananda Farm on Kameno Island and in the community, and then here in this marvelous temple, Blue Lotus Temple, and the Joyous Within You Fest yesterday, and the music and the art and everything, and the joy of service. You all are doing a marvelous job here, really. I'm saying this from an outside observer, and our deep appreciation goes to all of you. Last night, Jyotish and I were talking just how thrilling it is to see this work, Master's work through Ananda, spreading with such joy and creativity and expansion throughout the world. And we just have to keep doing, as Gyanamata said, more and better, more and better. There's so much left to be done. It's just beginning. We had our 50th anniversary in 2019, and it really felt like we were just beginning. And for all of you, I think what you've created is really amazing. This temple, the farm, the beautiful community, and many of you we've known for decades. Some of you we've just met. But this flow of joyful energy. And, you know, Swami Jyotish said that Master said our work is Ananda's path, or his path is meditation and service. Well, then Master said particularly to Swami Kriyananda, your life is one of intense activity and meditation. And Swami said, I got it, that I had a lot to do, but try to keep a practice of meditation strong throughout. There's a lot to be done to equalize the world on the spiritual plane. There's a lot to be done to be keeping that wave of joyful energy, giving and serving people. And we just have to keep doing what you're doing, but for each of us to look in our hearts and say, what more can I do? How can I do it better? How can I do it more with the thought of God? Whatever it might be. Swami told a story when he was a young monk. He had a fellow monk, and they were building, I think it was the Hollywood Church, and the man was nailing studs in the frame of the building that would be covered over by sheetrock, plasterboard, but he was being very careful how he nailed each nail. And someone said, why are you taking so much time? No one will see it. And he said, God will see it. And that's a wonderful way to approach service. Just God sees it. You know, if you're walking across a room and you see some clutter on the floor, just even if no one knows, no one sees, I always like to have this motto: leave wherever I was a little better than when I came. And like, we have a big, not very pleasant, but necessary compost area at Ananda Village. And I was there the other day dumping off my compost, our compost, and there was, the hose had fallen and it was in the mud that you spray out your bucket with. And nobody was there, but I thought, you need to do that. So I climbed down into the mud, picked up the hose, hooked it up. But just those little unseen acts of service, I think that's what pleases God the most, when no one else sees it but Him, you and Him. And that's the thrilling part of it. So I just want to close. Soon we're going to have a very nice ordination ceremony, and we're going to ordain Bhima as a light bearer. So I won't go on too much longer, but I just want to encourage you all, help build this great work that Master initiated, Swami founded, Padman Hriman and many others have continued to keep in its vibrancy. Keep your minds positive, keep them uplifted, and give God everything you have. The more you give, the more you'll get. And I don't mean materially, but I mean it spiritually. And the more joy you give, the more you will be filled with joy. The more energy you put out, the more you will be filled with energy. So this work in Seattle, it's been going for 30 years. We lost count, 40. But it's just beginning. And it needs every one of us to give it everything we've got. And then it will be, we can look back on a life and we can say, God, I lived with you, I lived for you, and the gifts you have given me of joy and peace and expansive love are so much more than I ever could give in return. So just open your heart. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to give. I remember once, I'll close with this little story. I was working at the meditation retreat and at the desk. And at those days, it was the days not only before cell phones, but before phones. We had no phone up there. And so guests would register by the mail. So we never really knew who was coming or who wasn't coming. So we were having a weekend. I was at the desk, and we would give people little tents they could stay in, little cabins. Sometimes they brought their own sleeping bag and they would just camp out. And finally, we had this supply of sleeping bags in the storage room. And I humbly acknowledge, I don't think they were ever washed. I think we just gave them out to people as they came. And finally, it was about 10 o'clock at night. We had given out every sleeping bag. We had given out every tent space. There was nowhere else. And I see a car pulling up, and I thought, oh dear, what are we going to do? And the man said, well, I don't have any equipment. Do you have a sleeping bag for me? And I thought, and I said, yes, I'll go get one. And I ran back to the little cabin I was living in, and I got my pad and I got my sleeping bag. And I said, I didn't tell him it was mine. I said, here, and I showed him where to camp out. And that night, I didn't have either of those things. And in the morning, I didn't tell anybody, between me and God. And in the morning, Swami Kriyananda came up to me and he said, now you're getting the idea. And I thought, wow, okay, that's what it takes, everything you got. But that's what it takes, but it's worth every moment of it. So we look forward to, thank you for hosting us so beautifully. And by the way, that song, Deliver Us from Delusion, that's one of my favorite chants. I've never heard it chanted so beautifully. It really was very, very moving. And just continue to give your heart, to give your service, to give your joy to each other and to God. And how pleased God must be when he sees centers of light like Ananda throughout the world. God bless you.
Birds fly high in the summer sky, regardless